Okay, welcome to another edition of Inside the War Room. Ryan Ray here with, now Peter, I'm going to get it wrong, so I'll let you correct me. Peter, go ahead and say your name, Peter. So I don't want to disrespect you on your first appearance on the show. So,
thank you very much, Ryan. My name is Peter Abwao. I never hold anybody against it if they pronounce my second name wrong, even Kenyans all the time.
And you are, as you pointed out very clearly, the communications manager for the Kenyan Red Cross, and you said that you're not the spokesperson. And I thought that was interesting, just because a cultural thing. You're the communications manager, and there's a big distinction in Kenya between that and the spokesperson. Could you kind of maybe rehash that, just for a folks on this side of the pond, if you will, when they hear that term, they think it's interchangeable. But you said no, in Kenya, it's actually a distinct difference. Can you kind of just walk us through that really quick?
No, I think it's probably not just a Kenyan thing. I think within the Red Cross and in Kenya, the person in the position of chief executive is normally the one who is the spokesperson, the one who speaks on behalf. So
okay.
I'm exercising, whatever speaking I'm doing, I am doing it as a delegation. He's just delegated some mandate to say a few things on her behalf. We have our SG is a lady called Dr. Asha Mohammed. So one day I hope we can have her on your show.
Absolutely. We'd love to have her on. Okay, so one of the things I have been telling people here in the United States and anywhere I can get in front of is we have to pay attention to emerging markets. We had someone on talking about South America a few weeks ago. We've had someone from South Africa in the written content portion of our newsletter. But Kenya has something that I've been trying to get someone on, so I appreciate you coming on, because at least from my perspective, and you can kind of correct the narrative if obviously you're on the ground there, is that back in January, I remember hearing about locusts and biblical levels of plagues kind of in Eastern Africa, and you're like, oh my goodness gracious, what is going on over there? And then before you could really follow the story, you kind of were hearing the reports from the BBC. As an aside, I listen to the BBC Africa podcast regularly, so you kind of keep up with the high level news there. But you're kind of hearing the reports, like, this sounds like it could be kind of bad. And then next thing you know, we had the COVID kind of spread everywhere, and people shut down, and that kind of got lost. I don't know. And then at least from the U.S. perspective, and then there's been obviously the COVID pandemic, and then there's been floods in Kenya. Kind of walk people over the past 6 to 8 months, what's been going on at Kenya at a high level, and what are some of the difficulties that people have faced there dealing with the plagues, the floods, and obviously the COVID pandemic?
Thank you, Ryan. So, as you put it, let me begin by taking you a little beyond January, a little before January. So, last year, there was this weather phenomenon around the Indian Ocean. Kenya borders the Indian Ocean to the east. And so there was a phenomenon called the Indian Ocean Dipole. I think this is a case where there is excessive heating within the Indian Ocean. And so this brought a lot of rain in Eastern African countries, that is especially Kenya and Somalia. So around that time, there was a lot of flooding from October through November to December. And because we normally have dry months in December and January, we never had these dry months in December and January. So quite a number of people were displaced. We were talking about 100 to between 150 to 200,000 people were displaced from their homes. And this is besides those who temporarily moved out and they moved back again, those who lost their farms, those who lost their animals, and also a couple of those who actually died during the floods. There was a serious landslide in the western part of the country, in which it's estimated that over 60 people lost their lives in November last year. So coming into January, then people were recovering from those floods of 2019, and January then the locusts arrived from the east. It was like a real plague, because there hasn't been a locust invasion in Kenya for over 70 years. I think the last one was 70 years ago. So many Kenyans had never seen it. They heard about it, they'd read about it in the Bible, but they hadn't seen a locust invasion. So, when they see locusts, you bet they will treat it with some superstition. Why are we being attacked? So that is what happened. So the locusts came in when a lot of the pasture and the crops that were planted around the time, during the rains that I just said caused floods last year. So that is what happened. So we were dealing with locusts between January, February, and March, and they haven't quite gone away. There are pockets of areas where we still have locusts. So in fact, the Kenya Red Cross has had the privilege of conducting a serious impact assessment funded by the Food and Agriculture Organization to just look at how they can help those communities recover. So as we were dealing with the floods, then the rains from March to May, which is normally the long rain season in Kenya, came in, and it has also come with its own fair share of displacements. Many areas have been flooded. Many rivers have broken their banks. Lake Victoria, the largest freshwater body this side of the world, has its water levels rising so high, as high that the president of Uganda, Museveni, said that this has not been seen since 1963. So that is what we are going through. And so as we were coming into the COVID-19 pandemic, Kenyans were already burdened by the impact of floods and locust invasion. So COVID comes in, we are supposed to be maintaining issues like social distancing. Transport has been paralyzed, businesses are closing. And so these are just effects that are not now health, but you have a lot of the socio-economic impact. People can't quite afford food. So some of the things that the Red Cross have found themselves doing as a consequence of not just COVID, but the other disasters is to deal with a lot of mental issues, providing psychosocial support. People are having mental breakdown. And then we have had to engage into, and I've seen this in the United States, of course. The US is a very rich country. So when we see people lining up for food rations, it just amazes us and we say, wow, these are very bad. So we have been doing a lot of food distribution to communities in our informal settlements. So that's what is happening. But I like the way you started by talking about emerging markets. And I know this is something that maybe few journalists have looked at it, in the developed countries have looked at it from that perspective. Kenya has become, is one of the fastest emerging economies in this part of the world. And so what we are going through is obviously going to take us back many years. And so our ability to trade with other countries, the ability of the US, for example, to find market in Kenya is obviously going to be compromised. And so instead of being a trading partner with the US, we will end up probably being a country that then begins to wait for aid.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that has been a concern is, from my perspective at least, is one of the things that when you travel, again, I haven't been to, as I told you offline, I hadn't been to Eastern Africa, so I can't speak to how things on the ground are perceived there. My experience with Southern Africa, whether it was in Zambia or South Africa or Namibia, is on some level, those countries, they have their own governments and they're doing their own thing, but on some level, they're kind of following the lead of what is coming out of, maybe some of the European nations or the United States. And when the kind of Western nations were like, hey, we need to shut down everything, I immediately thought, well, we better be careful because, an American who's making, $80,000 a year or $120,000 a year or $200,000 a year or whatever is in a little bit different financial situation than, someone who's not making nearly that much money around the world. And so I felt like it was a decision that these emerging markets were going to have to figure out and work through because it's just the situations just aren't one-to-one. And so on top of it with Kenya, as you mentioned, we talked about the locusts and the plagues. It makes it very, very tough. Now you mentioned getting aid and stuff down there. So obviously I was supposed to go to, I can kind of tell you what I know about the flight situation from a commercial standpoint. I was supposed to go to Gambia back in end of March. Whenever President Trump shut down the travel through Europe, I was about 10 days out my trip. So whenever that was, I was supposed to go to Gambia and then to Mali and maybe to Ivory Coast. And so I know the commercial flights kind of have stopped. Has it been a problem to get aid through airline transportation at all? Or has it had to be ships? How have y'all gotten aid? Because, if you're wanting to fly commercially, until recently, you just about couldn't do much. So over these past few months, it's been hard to get resources into Kenya?
Yes, from the standpoint of the Red Cross, of course, this has been a challenge because there has not been a lot of flights coming in, except the cargo flights. And some of the kind of stuff that you want to bring in have generally been coming in through commercial flights, unless you have big cargo that you want to fly in. So yes, that has been a challenge, and Kenya hasn't opened up its airspace yet for external flights. I'm told they are considering doing that, but they haven't done. And just back to the point around making the decision whether to lock down the way the West, Italy or the US could do. That was a big challenge at the beginning, and it remains a big challenge even now, because in Kenya we haven't started flattening the curve, let alone reducing the infections of COVID. In fact, they are going up. But we've been under temporary lockdown. Temporary, I mean, in the capital city, there's a curfew across the country from a night curfew across the country, and then there is cessation of movement between a number of the counties that had higher infections earlier and the rest of the country. So, for example, I am in Nairobi. I cannot leave Nairobi to go to other counties. Of course, as a Red Crosser, I may be able to leave for work, but largely that has been restricted. The reason why we couldn't go to full lockdown and say, okay, people can't leave their houses, they can't go to work, is primarily for that same reason. People do not have sufficient savings or sufficient resources. People live from hand to mouth, literally. They earn today, they eat all of it today. It's not enough for the same day they have earned. So if you tell them that they're going to sit, the government then would have to have a plan to feed people. And the government doesn't have that money. At least in the US, you're lucky Trump send you a few checks.
Right. Right. No, that's exactly right. Is that, to look around and say, hey, yeah, we're going to shut down. And what could it feels like the U.S. obviously, depending on the state and what's going on, obviously we're at various phases of reopening. But there was a concern about a meat shortage here in the U.S. You start to roll it out, like, okay, well, if there is a legitimate meat shortage in the U.S., well, that only gets larger orders of magnitude as you get away from the U.S., right? Because we can't export meat, and so all of those things are there. And I will say this though, just as an aside, with the U.S. and China kind of going back and forth over, is China going to buy the soybeans or stuff? There might be plenty of farmers here in the U.S. who will be happy to work out a deal to send some stuff down to Kenya or wherever, if the U.S. and China can't figure out how to play nicely together, because they will have plenty of crop available. But we're not at that point, and so obviously you can't predict this, and I'm not asking you to, but from the folks over here, give us maybe a couple of things to follow over the next few months, and then how to think about this moving forward. Because I don't know if there's some if there's some nationally published milestones or goals that Kenya is looking for to reach, where they kind of maybe open stuff back up, or if it's just kind of we're not that far along, as you kind of said. That's we got a ways to go still. So how should the folks that are watching this or listening to this rather, how should they think about that? How far out is Kenya from maybe being somewhere? Because if you're a doctor or if you're a farmer or whatever, and you want to work with Kenya, and you're going, okay, well, I kind of need to know, what should I be looking for? Is there again a target date or a timetable? Kind of help us with that, just to kind of understand what kind of framework we're dealing with, or timetable we're dealing with, rather.
So in the couple of the last 1 month, there has been government has been moving and considering opening up, but the discussion has, and I'm not in government, so I can't quite authoritatively speak about what government
is doing.
But one of the big targets that government wants to make sure is that the health system is at least able to deal with any potential rise in cases before any consideration of opening up is done. So, for example, our health system is weak. There are some hospitals which do not have even ICU beds, let alone ventilators. They do not have isolation wards. They do not have those facilities. So what they are doing now is to try and make sure that these are ramped up, so that even if you opened and then you have cases growing, those that eventually end up at the hospital are able to be taken care of. In Kenya, we are also, and I think this has been happening in the US anyway, informally, In Kenya, everybody who tested positive was taken to quarantine, government facilitated quarantine. But we have, and those who got sick, even if they did not have serious symptoms. So what now, they've developed a policy for home-based care for those that do not require hospitalization, so that they can allow people to quarantine from home, and even those that are sick but not seriously sick, they can be taken care of from the home. So once these things are in place, it is hoped that therefore the government will be able to make some sort of reopening once they have figured out how to do this. So that's basically what we are looking at, because for now the cases are still going up. I know for flights, for example, they've also moved very close in terms of making our international airports able to do thorough screening and isolation of any those that come in, so that they can be able to detect positive cases at the airport instead of having them get into the community. And that is those are some of the measures I have heard government ministers speak about as in being critical before they consider reopening. I know we also have the president has been addressing the country like on a monthly basis to provide an update on the measures. I think at around the 6th of July, there will be an address. There may be some restrictions may be loosened around that time, because the agreement with regional governors, the regional governments, was that each regional government will have put up a certain number of isolation beds by that time. So if that will have happened, then it would provide a good direction of what government wants to do going forward.
Okay. And let me ask you this. I know we connected through the Kenyan Red Cross Twitter page. I will tweet out that that page when we after this goes public. Is there anywhere else that people, if they're on Twitter or social media, anywhere else that they can follow so they can kind of know what's going on, or kind of get just a good news feed for just the high level points of what's going on in Kenya?
So if it is for disasters, the combined disasters of, for example, Kenya Red Cross is really the premier disaster response organization. So for floods, for locusts and all that, keep into the Kenya Red Cross Twitter account. For issues around COVID, there is the Ministry of Health. I think if you, I'll probably send you an WhatsApp of their Twitter account for the Ministry of Health, and that they keep posting around the numbers and any decisions that they may make. And then there is the official government Twitters. I can share with you that I can't remember it's offhand. So those are some of the things that the handles that you can get official information from. And then of course we have media houses here. Do you know any media houses in Kenya?
Not personally, just the ones I follow online.
Yeah, so maybe from the local media houses like the like the Nation Media Group, Citizen TV, those ones, I think they will be good sources of information.
Okay. All right. Well, we will link to the a couple of those things for people to go and to follow, and hopefully, as the COVID pandemic eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, gets out of Kenya and the plague, the locusts go away, and there's no flooding, we would love to get you back on just to kind of keep people updated on what is going on. We do appreciate your time. I know you are obviously super busy, and so thank you. And we will be following what you guys have going on, and as soon as things get open back up, we will love to hear about. Love to hear, but just want to hear about what the actual impact is, because it's hard to measure right now. I know.
Thank you very much. And I'm also going to send you my personal Twitter. I would like to connect with you, and it looks like you do great stuff over there.
Yes.
That would be lovely to keep connecting.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And for the listeners, we will link to all this stuff where you can go check it out. And we will be back. I don't know. I think we're back tomorrow or the day after. So we'll talk to you then.